Are you able to see the screen? Good. So, in our yesterday's class, we were continuing on state management, and we started with the server-side state management techniques. And under that, we started understanding something called as session object. And what is a session object? A session object is a way of maintaining the state on the server side, and the scope of your session object is restricted to the particular user session. What does that mean? For example, think that there is a website, web application written in .NET, and three of us, we are accessing the web application on three different machines. Fine. So, understanding? Yes or no? Hello? Guys, are you there? Can you hear me? Good. So, think that three of us, we are accessing the application from three different machines. Then the each session of the application which is opened in an individual machine is called as a user session. Fine. And the scope of the session object is restricted to the particular user session, which means a session object which is created by a particular user on a particular machine will not be accessible by some other machine, will not be accessible from the other session of the application running on some other machine, right? And we understood that there are two ways of maintaining the session state using your session object. And the first way is called as in-proc, under which we understood that the session object would be using the ASP.NET Web Server's W3WP process or your worker process for saving the data related to that session. Fine. And that is the default process, and this process is called as in-proc. Making sense? Prakriti, are you there? Vishwa, are you understanding or not? Good. The drawback associated with in-proc mode of session management is that the memory resources available would be very limited, right? So think that your web server is having only 1 GB of memory, then you can't go beyond 1 GB, right? So if you want to expand it and if you want to maintain large amount of data using your session state, then you should be using the second way of session state management, which is called as your outproc mode. Fine. Under outproc mode, again there are two different modes or two different ways of maintaining the session state. First one is called as your state server mode, where you will be creating a new process on some other server and you will be using it for explicitly for the session state management. Fine. Good. And the second way of maintaining the session state on your outproc mode is SQL Server mode, where you will be saving the sessions data in your SQL Server database. So there is no limit. You can get it extended to whatever limit you want. Fine. Yes or no? Good. So That is about your session state. There is one other way of maintaining your state on your server side, which is called as your application object. Fine. What is application object and how is it different from your session state? Application object again uses your system's worker process for saving the data associated with the session. However, it's different from your session state in a way that your application object would be accessible across all the user sessions, which means, for example, the 3 different user sessions running on 3 different machines, and one of the session has created a application object, then that would be accessible on the other sessions as well, right? So it's not restricted to a given user session. Making sense? Yes or no? Good. What's happening with you, Prakriti? Are you there? Prakriti, what's happening with you? I don't see responses from you. Okay, fine. Please respond, otherwise I will not understand, because we are in a uh, online session. We are not doing a classroom training, right? Good. So that's about your state management, and I am sending this notes to you, so I expect each one of you to go through this and let me know, or write a very brief document about state management, both on your client side and your server side. Fine. Can we do it by Monday's class? Fine, I have sent it to you. So in our next topic, we'll try to understand how to create a web application using your ASP.NET, and how to access different controls, or how to create different controls, and what are the basic attributes associated with these controls. Fine. Are you able to see Visual Studio on my screen? Good. Again, for creating a web application using ASP.NET, you will select the web group of templates, and as part of that, you'll be seeing something called as ASP.NET Empty Web Application, right? We will use that. However, if you want to have some default pages created with default headings and all, you can use ASP.NET Web Forms application. Fine. But I want that to be empty. Fine. And you'll give a meaningful name associated with it, and click OK. It will start creating the basic empty web application for you. Good. Are you able to see that? What is this window called? What is this window called? Solution Explorer. Awesome. Good. So it's called as Solution Explorer, and the purpose of it is to display different files associated with your solution in a hierarchical order based on the different applications which you have created. Fine. And as we understood earlier, one application can have multiple projects as part of it. Fine. So here the solution name is ASP33, and there is a project called as ASP33 associated with it again, and you can add any number of projects to a solution. I can click a new project and I can add one other web application as well. Making sense? So solution is the root node and it can contain any number of projects, and here we have created one project. And how to add different web forms or different files to this project called as ASP33. Okay, so I am right clicking on the project and I am clicking on add, and I am selecting item, and I am selecting something called as web form. Making sense? And I'll name it default.aspx. Fine. And what is this? This is a web form. What is a web form? Every logical user interface screen associated with your application is represented using a web form. For example, think that you have a login page for your application and you have a home page for your application. So each and every logical screen associated with your application is represented using a web form. Making sense? Good. And the web form will have three different files created along with it. Okay, so if you see, there is something. Oh, fine, I have created a VB based project. Let me create a C# based project. One second, let me create it again. So I'm selecting new project and I'm selecting C# based templates, and I am selecting web group, and I am selecting empty web application. I am naming it ASP33 CS. Fine. Got it? So here again, under the solution explorer, I'll right click on the project and I'll add a new web form, and I'll give it a meaningful name called as default.aspx. Fine. So here you see that the form gets created and there will be three different files associated with your form. Are you able to see them? First one is your .aspx file, and as part of that you will see that there are two attached files to it called as .aspx.cs file and .aspx.designer.cs file. Got it? Good. And the .aspx file holds the markup associated with your page. So it tells you how the user interface needs to be created. So the .aspx file is associated with the user interface of the project. Making sense? What is a markup? Any idea? No, not HTML exactly, but it's called as markup. No, not XML. So if you see, have you ever came across some HTML XML files? Have you ever seen them? Good. Let me show you. Let me add a HTML file. Okay. And let me add a XML file as well. Fine. So, do you see any similarities between the HTML file and the ASPX file and the XML file? No? Good. Let me tell you. Maybe I can name it. Fine. So this is how your XML file looks like. So this is how your HTML file looks like, and this is how your ASPX file looks like. So do you see any similarities between all of them? If you, let me show you, or let me collapse all of them so that it makes more sense to you. If you see here, there is a root node called as HTML. Under that there are two child nodes called as head and body, and again under your head child node there is one other child node called as title, right? Yes or no? And again, if you go to your HTML page, it looks the same. Okay, it's arranged in form of different nodes. Okay, this is root node, and this is the child node associated with it, and this is the head node, right? So again in XML it happens the same way. This is the root node, these are the child nodes, right? This way of arranging the data into multiple nodes hierarchically is called as markup. No, DOM is different. It's called as markup. Making sense? And there are multiple types of markup languages. So what is XML? XML is extensive markup language, which is used for holding some data. Fine. So this is XML. What is the purpose of XML? Think that there are two different applications which are written in different systems. So think that you have a Java based system and you have a .NET based system. So for them to communicate with each other, they don't know each other, right? They don't know each other's syntaxes and each other's languages, right? So when data has to be transferred between a Java machine and .NET machine, or a Java system and .NET system, or PHP system, then they'll use XML, because XML is a universal standard. Correct, exactly. It's a universal standard for transferring the data, fine, or saving the data. Making sense now? And what is HTML? Hypertext markup language. This is a markup again, right? This is used for communicating over web, right? Excellent. Web browsers. So similarly, you have one other markup which is used for representing the user interface associated with your ASP.NET based web forms, which is called as your ASPX file. Fine. And ASPX is written in similar lines to your HTML, and it would be rendered as HTML on your browsers. Making sense? Your ASP.NET framework will convert it into HTML and render it on browsers, right? So for that reason, it will be looking similar to HTML, and it is compatible with HTML code also. Do you know HTML? Do you have any idea how HTML looks like? Good. So you can write HTML code also, right? Input is a HTML based control, right? And this has its own set of controls again. So all the ASP controls or ASP.NET based controls would be represented using a prefix called as tag prefix called as ASP. Got it? We understood that each and every meaningful element in your markup language is called as a tag, right? We call that as a tag, right? XML tag. XML has multiple tags here, right? Similarly, each and every element you create using your ASP.NET would be starting with a tag prefix, because if you write something like this, this is a tag, fine. And if you are representing a ASP.NET based controls, they would be starting with a tag prefix called as ASP colon, fine. And after that, the control will have its own name. Okay, if it is label, it will have label. Got it? Good. And now let me add a element here, and all the ASP.NET controls should be having each and every property associated with the element or field or control, as we call them, is called as a attribute. Okay, there are multiple features associated with it, right? So if you have a label will have many properties like background color, font color, and your length of it, width of it, height of it, right? So all these properties are called as attributes, correct? Fine. Making sense, Prakriti? Good. So every control has a default attribute called as ID. Fine. What is ID? What is ID? ID is identifier. In your schools or colleges, you will have student ID, right? So what does ID do? ID will uniquely identify a person, right? So here, this ID will be used for uniquely identifying a control, right? So think that there are 100 controls on this page. Each one should have an identifier associated with it, right? So this ID represents identification or unique identification associated with your control. Making sense? And there is one other default attribute which should be mandatorily represented called as runat equal to server. Fine. We'll get into details of what does runat equal to server do and what is the purpose of adding it. We'll check it a bit later. Fine. Making sense? But for now, understand that it is mandatory for ASP.NET based controls. Okay, for HTML controls, you need not put it. Fine. Now, do you see two other files associated with your web form called as .aspx.cs and .designer.cs? And in our previous class, if you remember, we understood that every web form would be represented as a page, and page is a object which would be created and it gets destroyed once the page gets rendered on your browser as HTML, right? Good. So if you see, the code behind or the server side code would be written in your CS file called as your aspx.cs file, and you can navigate to it from your design page by clicking on view code or by selecting the file on your Solution Explorer. Both ways you can do it, right? And if you see, as we understood earlier, each page is a class. Fine? Making sense? And the name of that class would be the name which you have given to that page. So I have given the name as default.aspx. So the class name associated with this particular .cs file is default. And where is it being inherited from? So what is it inheriting? So it's inheriting the page class, right? So the page class represents page. We understood that, right? Object of page is created, right? So when you start accessing this page, the object of default, which is of page type, would be created, right? And this file, the .cs file or this class called as default, would be used for writing the server side code. Fine. So if I start building this application, you'll see that where is this code located? So you'll see that a bin folder gets created, right? Are you able to see that? So this contains all the binaries associated with your application. So DLL exists here, right? So your server side code goes into this DLL. Making sense? And how will you publish your code? You'll go to build and you'll click on publish selection and you'll create a new profile, local profile. I'll name it and I'll say file system deploy. Okay, and I'll deploy it in the same place again. Okay, I'll give it a name like publish ASP33. Okay, so this is the location where it gets published. And I'm publishing it. Okay, now I'll go to that folder and see how it gets published. Are you able to see that? This is the code which gets published on your server if you publish it. Making sense? If you see, there is no CS file which is getting published, right? Only ASPX files are getting published, right? Yes or no? So where will the CS files go? They'll go into your bin folder as DLLs. Fine. This is your DLL. Good. So that's about your DLL. That's about your code behind. And whenever you make some, so you make a call to the server, okay, or whenever you are executing some business logic, a call would be made to the server and that appropriate DLL would be called. Fine. Good. Now the third file associated with your web form is your designer.cs file. So what is the designer.cs file? Okay, if we go here, earlier we understood that each and every control which gets added to your page is a object again, right? Object of what type? This control type, and each and every control you have is again a class. Making sense? And when you add a new control, a object of that control type would be created. So if you go to designer.cs file, you will see that you have added a label test control, right? Label control. So what do you see? That is a object of type here label. System.web.ui.webcontrols.label type, right? Got it? And what is this label class? It's a class, system defined class. Again, if you go to definition, you'll see that this is a class, right? Understood or not? Good. So what does this designer.cs file contain? Designer.cs file contains the definitions associated with the elements on your form, right? Understood? Good. If you add one more control, you'll see the definition associated with that control as well in your designer.cs file. Are we good? Is it understood? Good. Coming to your label control, now let's start with the label control and let's understand what are the basic level controls we have and what are the major attributes associated with them, right? And again, how is one more thing before getting there, how is this page related to the code behind? How is it tagged to the code behind? How does it get tagged? If you see, the wiring between your ASPX file and the .cs file would be your page directive. Okay, anything which is represented using this symbol called as less than percentage at the rate, that is called as directive. There are multiple directives which we will be coming across throughout the course, and for now understand that this is your page directive. Fine. What is directive used to represent? It is used to represent default properties associated with your web form. Fine. If you want to define some properties or define some setting associated with your page, you will add a directive. Okay, and here the page directive gives the default properties associated with your page. If you see, there are multiple attributes associated with it. Again, one attribute is your language attribute, which says that the code behind is written in C#, right? And if you see, there is something called as auto wire up, right? What does auto wire up do? It will automatically, if you add anything to your control, then it can be automatically accessible on your .cs file. So it creates the wiring between your control and your code behind file. Understood? And there is a property called as code behind, which will say where is the code behind file located. So I'll say that this is the code behind file name, default.spx.cs file, right? And there is some other thing called as inherits. This will tell what is the class associated with the code behind file. And as we understood earlier, you can have multiple classes in a file, right? So this is the file and this is the class inside it which needs to be tagged to this control, right? So if we go to that, you'll see that this is the namespace and this is the class. So in total, this is the class associated with your code behind file. Got it? Again, you can also represent it as class name and you can also add the namespace as well. Fine. So I think you can represent it as class name only. Okay, fine. You understood, right? Did you understand what does this attributes represent and what is a page directive? Any questions? Good. Fine. Good. So now let's try to understand the different properties associated with your label control. Okay, so first and foremost, and again let's get back to the run it equal to server. So why do we need it mandatorily for ASPX controls? Let me show the importance of the run it server using a HTML control. Okay, id equal to HTML test. Okay, and type equal to button. Okay, this is a HTML control, not a SPX control. And now if I go to code behind and start typing LBL, so you are able to detect the label test control from your server side code, right? So you are able to access the label test control from your code behind, right? Yes or no? But if you see HTML, if you type HTML, so HTML-T, you will not see that the HTML test control which we have added on your markup is, you can see that it's not identified from your code behind file, right? You are unable to see that. Yes or no? Good. Now let's go back and add some attribute called as run it equal to server to it. Now let's try accessing it now. Are you able to see that? Is it getting detected on the server side now? Good. So what does that mean? If you want to make the server side detect or make the control accessible from server side, you'll have to add that run it equal to server attribute. Making sense? Good. So now when we are talking about ASPX controls or ASP.NET based controls, they should be mandatorily accessible from the server side, right? Because the business logic needs them, right? Yes or no? So that's the reason why it's made mandatory to add the run it equal to server attribute to your ASPX controls. Fine. If I remove it, it will throw a error. So are you seeing the error? However, it's not mandatory for HTML controls. Got it? Good. So coming back to the important attributes associated with your ASPX control called as label, the first and foremost one is text. What is the purpose of label control? What is the purpose of label control? No, not entering text. To display some text. To display some text. Got it? To display some text on the user interface. So text attribute is used to display the text. So I'll type in testing the label. Okay. And if I run this code, you'll see that the text is being displayed on the browser. Are you able to see the text? And again, if we right click on it and click on view page source, you'll see that the label control which you have added gets converted into HTML based span, right? So what does that mean? That means your AXPX is getting converted into HTML and being rendered on the browser at runtime. Making sense? Good. And now if I change something, if I add something on, if I change something on my ASPX file, then you can see the content by refreshing the page. Fine. Are you seeing the changes? However, if I change something on the code behind, it requires a build. It can't be accessed by default, right? Fine. Why so? Because this code exists on the DLL. This .cs file code exists on your DLL, right? So DLL requires a build every time you make changes to it. So that's the reason why if something gets changed on your CS file, you'll have to do a build. But if it is on ASPX file, you don't need a build. It gets refreshed automatically. Fine. And the next important property associated with your label control is back color. Fine, you can assign a color to it. So I say that I require blue color. Okay, I'm removing the HTML control. So now are you seeing that the background color or background of it getting changed to blue? Good. Now let's go back and add one more property called as forecolor. So I'll say white. Fine. If I refresh the page, you'll see that the font or color of the text is getting changed, right? So what is the purpose of the property called as forecolor? It will change the color of the text. And what is the purpose of the back color? It will change the background. Making sense? And there are few other properties like here font bold. It will make the font as bold, and font italic. It will change the font to italic. Fine. Font underline will underline it. And these are the basic properties. You go ahead and refresh it again, you'll see that it gets bolded, italic and underlined, right? And if I want to change the size of the font, I'll use font size. Okay. And I have multiple font sizes like large, larger, small, medium. Okay, I'll select large. It got large, right? And if I select larger, it gets more larger. If I want to increase it more, I can select something like X large. It makes it more larger. And if I want to change it even larger, I say double X large. Making sense? That's about here. Size control, font size attribute. Okay, and border doesn't make sense for this. It's there, but it doesn't make sense. Okay, you can use any given font names like text Times New Roman or anything like that. Okay, so Caliber, whatnot. So you can use any of the fonts which are installed on your Windows local machine. Fine. And one other important property is tooltip. Okay, so it doesn't make sense to add tooltip to your label, but again we'll see what is that. Testing the tooltip. Okay, what does it do? It will display this text when you hover over that control, right? What is hovering? Mouse over. Okay, if you mouse over this, you will see a tooltip which says testing the tooltip. Are you able to see that? Good. So that's the purpose of your tooltip. And there is one other control, one other attribute called as visible. Okay, if I make it as visible false, the control will not be displayed, right? It will not be visible. And again, if I make it to true, it gets visible. Right? Got it? And font strikeout will strike out the text. Right? And you can add CSS file to any of the controls. We'll look at it a bit later, how to add it and all. Fine? Good. Now, there is one other control which looks similar to it, and it is called as text box. Fine? And I'll give it a meaningful name. Give it a meaningful name called as txt test. Txt test. Fine. So this is my text box. So this, most of the basic properties remain same. Fine. What is the purpose of text box, by the way? What is the purpose of text box? Yes, to input some text. Fine. Control txt test inside the form tag with runat equal to server. I might have removed runat equal to server. Let me rerun it. Must be placed inside the form tag with runat equal to server. Control inside the form tag. It's inside the form tag only. Fine. Let me remove it and add it again. ASP colon text box and id is equal to txt test. Run it equal to server, which is the mandatory field, which is mandatory attribute. Why is it saying inside? Must be placed inside the form tag. Did I remove the form tag or what? Okay, I removed the form tag. That's the problem. Somehow accidentally I removed the form tag. So fine. Are you able to see the text box here? The difference is that label is used to display something and text box is used to receive something as input. Fine. And again, let me remove all these bullshit properties which is making it look weird. Back color equal to gray, fore color equal to black, and size equal to extra large. Fine. Fine. Here I can enter text. So now there are few unique properties associated with your text box which you should understand. First one is mode. Are you able to see the text mode property? So it takes care of unique type of text which you would be entering in your text box. So something like, I will take number. So if I start refreshing it and if I start typing in text, it will not take text. Fine. If I start typing in number, it will take it. Fine. So it will accept only numbers. Similarly, password, okay, will accept only. So do you want to display the password when you type in password in your text box? Somebody can shoulder surf, right? Yes or no? You don't want to display it. Instead, you want to see dots, correct? Dots are something like stars or something like that, right? So if I start typing in, it would be masked. So this is called as masking. Fine. And one other important mode is multi-line mode. Fine. And what does multi-line mode do? Let me fix some height of the text box. So I'll make it 300. And if you see here, you can type in the text in multiple lines. Got it? However, if you select a normal text box, by default it will be entering everything in one line. Did you understood the difference between multi-line text box and a normal text box? Good. And similarly, there are multiple other modes like your email mode or phone mode or many things like that, which you can use to specify only certain format of text inside your text box. Making sense? And if you have Let me see, one other property should be there. You can also specify number of rows and columns when you are writing when you are using multi-line text box also. Okay, and there is one other property called as maximum length. Okay, see, let me remove this multi-line property to make it look appropriate, and I have made the maximum length of the text box to 10. Okay, and now what happens if I start typing in elements 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. After that, even if I am typing, it will not take it. It will restrict the maximum length. Understood? That's one other important property associated with your text box. Border. Okay, border style we have not looked at. So if you want doubled border, okay, so border across your text box, you can select double. Okay, and if you want dashed, you can select dashed. Are you able to see a dashed border? So similarly, you can have any type of border you want, and border width can be fitted again. Okay, so I'll say border width is 5. Okay, it increases the border width. By default, it should be 1. Are you able to see that? It is looking weird, but just for explaining you, I have made it like that. Making sense? And enabled is one other property associated with your text box. It's something similar to your visible property, but it's a bit different. Okay, if you make it enabled equal to false, the text box gets disabled, which means it will get grayed out. Okay, to show you properly, I'll remove the background color of my text box, which makes the background as white, and then you can observe the difference. Okay, so it's grayed out. If you see, I can't type in text into it. It will just be visible. You can't edit it. Fine. And it will be more obvious when you add some default text. Okay, I have added some default text to it, and now if it is not enabled, then you can't change the text. Got it? Good. And good. One other thing is your word wrap. Do you know what is word wrap by any chance? It will be more of obvious if we start looking at Excel. Okay, so if I start typing in text in a field, okay, it will overflow to the next cell also, right? So are you able to see that or not? But if I want the text to be restricted to this particular cell only, what I can do, I can wrap it using word wrap. Okay, if you see alignment, wrap the text, so it would be restricted to that cell. Got it? So similar thing can be done by using your text box's word wrap property. Fine, wrap equal to true. Got it? There are multiple other controls which we need to look at, but we'll look at them in our next class, which is on Monday. So don't miss the next class, because we'll be looking at 10 or 11 different controls which you will be coming across in your real time, and all the properties associated with them. Okay, so don't miss the class on Monday. Fine. Okay, so that's it for the day. And thanks for joining the session. Have a good weekend. No, not this weekend, Prakriti. Okay, I want to complete this ASP thing, and we can have a practice session after that. Okay, fine. Okay, thank you. Bye.